All right. Okay.
All right.
Speaking of food. Pesach, food. Okay. How was that for a segue? Yeah. As I said before, I couldn't make any segue for the conversation to the class for Torah today, but that I can make a segue because we are wrapping up our questions about Shabbat and Pesach and the sacrifice, and then we are going to get into the real cooking. We're going to get into actually how you cook the Pesach, because remember we sacrificed it, but you don't serve it raw. you got to cook it. And unlike our modern no sacrifice dinners, we don't get to cook the Pesach just how you feel, right? It's not like you can just come up with all sorts of different recipes for the Pesach. There's a specific way it has to be cooked, and more importantly, specific ways it can't be cooked. And that's what we're going to look into. So that's chapter 7. We've got just a couple more bits of chapter 6 to run through, and then we'll be on to chapter 7. Okay? Okay. Everybody's happy. Now, I believe, and check me if I'm wrong. Well, before we go on, quick reminder, next week, no class. We're having a teacher staff meeting.
Oh, okay.
Right? So next week, no class, teacher staff meeting. So learn extra tonight. That'll save you up, through the dry spell. Exactly. All right. So I believe that we had finished chapter 6, Mishnah 3. We were on Mishnah. Did we finish 4?
Yes.
We did finish 4.
Yes.
Right, because the idea that this chagiga, this extra meat, right? Remember we talked about the chagiga being the extra meat that was brought because you may not get a whole lot of Pesach, depending upon which group you're with for the lamb. This was the extra meat, and they were explaining it can be brought from all sorts of different things. The requirements are much looser than the requirements are for the actual Pesach. Good? Good. All right. So let's go ahead and hit then Mishnah 5. This one has a lot more meat on the bone. Sorry. This one has a lot more details about it. So, and it's going to be much more like, I believe it was Mishnah 2, with what we call the Shakla Vataria, the back and forth between two rabbis, again, Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer. And we're going to see, again, how the reasoning process works.
Why both of them? Why specifically both rabbis, these two rabbis?
Because this is the tradition we have. I mean, that's the shortest answer, which is when the Mishnah was being put together from Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbi Judah the Prince. These are the selections from the oral tradition that he felt were the best refinement of our teachings. Why he felt it was necessary to include any of this discussion, the back and forth, rather than just Rabbi Eliezer says this, Rabbi Yoshua says this, we can only speculate. But he didn't give us his own explanation of the explanation. That's just, sometimes we're stuck with that.
Sorry, did you find the answer for the email?
Not yet. Sorry.
No, because now it's need the connection.
Yep. Okay, so chapter 6, Mishnah 5. If you remember, we've been talking about Shabbos, right? What happens if the day before Passover, which means the day you're supposed to do the sacrifice of Passover, is Shabbat? There are certain things you can do, can't do, and now we're going to get into the oops category. You may remember we were talking before about just a regular day. If you're trying to do a sacrifice and it's for the wrong reason, does it still count or not count? Well, now we're going to get to what happens if you do the sacrifice or the wrong sacrifice for the wrong reason or the right reason, and it's Shabbat. What happens? Okay, well, you'll see once we get it rolling, it'll all become clear. No guarantees.
Right. Mishnah 5.1: if the Pesach was slaughtered for a different purpose on Shabbat, then he, the slaughterer, is liable to a sin offering on its account.
All right, so let's make sure that we understand what we mean by liable in this case. Right? In this case, when we say a liable for a sin offering, we're talking about you broke Shabbat. Right? We're not talking about breaking Passover. We're talking about breaking Shabbat. Right? And so think about the category here. You've got a Pesach, right? This is my lamb. I designate it for the Pesach offering. You take the lamb, you go to Jerusalem along the way. I don't know, you're playing Crossy Road or something. You forget what you're doing. You get up to the temple and you say, this is my lamb, and it is and you say some other offering. right? It's the wrong offering. And they slaughter it, right?
On Shabbat?
That's the problem. You have slaughtered the proper animal, right? It was supposed to be your Pesach offering, but you've slaughtered it for a different purpose, right? Somehow your intention flipped. You were absent-minded. You forgot what you were doing. You're standing in a huge line, crowd of people all slaughtering their lambs. And for whatever reason, you had the wrong intention. So we already know the lamb is no longer good for Pesach, right? That we've covered in previous Mishnayot, in earlier parts. But the question is, are you liable for having broken Shabbat?
But the Kohanim didn't say anything like, hey, today we are only in the business of lambs.
You were checking your email. I don't know. I mean,
no, because if you see so many people doing this, if someone brings something different, and for me it's common sense.
Oh, no, it's not different. That's the thing. Remember, it's the Pesach.
It is a lamb.
You designated this lamb as going to be your Pesach. So it is the right animal. It's fit to be the Pesach offering, right? It could be the Pesach offering. And if you did what you were planning to do, it would be the Pesach offering.
Yeah.
But somehow your intention slipped.
But would they slaughter a lamb on Shabbat if you brought it as a thanks offering?
No.
So how would it happen that it would get slaughtered for a different purpose on Shabbat?
Because you're just part of the group.
Oh.
Right? You remember the whole big 3 groups of people and the lines of people and the basins and all of that? I know. You shouldn't forget. And perhaps it never happened.
Right.
But they wanted to explain what would happen if that did happen.
If your intention was wrong.
And remember, we've said more and more, many times, intention matters. Right? So you might think it's the right lamb. It's fit for a Pesach offering. You had the right thing in mind when you first designated it as being a Pesach offering. You're standing in the right place. You're slaughtering it the right way. The basin is collecting the blood, and it's going to do all the things. No, if you somehow thought of it as being a different type of sacrifice, and then you slaughtered it right then, you are liable, meaning you broke Shabbat. You have to bring another sacrifice as a sin offering for having broken Shabbat, for having violated Shabbat, and you still need to go find another lamb for your Pesach offering. Oh, indeed. Okay.
How about using the one that was slaughtered as a sin offering?
That was the sin.
Yeah, not once you did it for the wrong reason.
Right. That lamb is a sin. You can't turn around and say, well, use that one. No, that's the problem lamb.
Especially because the sin offering now has to be brought after Pesach because he can't do on Pesach for a different reason than for the.
Exactly. So again, when we say liable or when we say exempt, what we're really arguing about is, did you break Shabbat or did you not break Shabbat? Whether or not you can use it for Passover, we've already covered that issue in the previous Mishnayot. Right in here, we're just talking about Shabbat violation. Make sense? Everybody agrees. You have the right animal, but you have the wrong reason. You broke Shabbat. Make sense? Makes sense.
Okay.
Part 2.
All other sacrifices which he slaughtered as a Pesach.
Okay, let's make sure we understand. You brought another animal that was supposed to be for something else. And you're going to sacrifice it as a Pesach offering instead. Right? So you've changed your designation the other direction.
So other animal could be sacrificed or only lambs?
We're going to get to that in a second, right? But because that's going to be whether or not it's fit, right? So the basic idea is you in the first category, right? The one that everybody agrees on, right? You've got a lamb for Pesach, and somehow it becomes other. And if you do it another, right, that equals meh, you're in trouble.
But didn't we discuss last time that the lambs are very small and they may not be enough? So couldn't you sacrifice a cow also from the herd?
That was the Hagiga.
Yes.
Right? That's the bonus one, right?
Yes. So.
But this is not talking about that. This is only talking about you thought it was the Pesach, but then you thought it was something else when you slaughtered it. You're in trouble.
All right.
But now we're looking at the other category. What if you've got something else? That is to say, you didn't think this was going to be your Pesach offering when you looked at it and you said, I designate you for fill in the blank of whatever other sacrifice you were thinking. But then you walk it up to the temple, and when you get in line, you're saying, oh, I want to sacrifice this for Passover, right? You change the mentality. So you go from other to Pesach.
Yeah.
What happens? Not whether is it okay, not whether is it okay for Pesach or not, although that will matter, but are you liable for breaking Shabbat or not?
Because your intention changed.
Well, because you're doing something that is muddy.
Yeah.
Right? If it was a Passover lamb that you slaughtered for Passover, then you can break Shabbat, in quote, break Shabbat in order to sacrifice it. But if one part of that is off balance, what's the ruling? And the first one is very simple. Everybody agrees. If it was a Passover lamb, it was fit for Passover, but when you did you were thinking of it a different way, and you broke Shabbat because that's not a Passover lamb, and that's the only reason you have to slaughter, and therefore you've did something on Shabbat for no good reason. But what about the other direction? Now we're going to get a disagreement. Well, we're going to get one part they agree and then a disagreement. So 2A.
2A, if they are not fit to be a Pesach, he is liable.
All right, so here's your cow, right? Or your old goat rather than a young goat, right? You bring the wrong animal for Passover, and God knows how the Kohanim let you in.
Right.
And you get up there and you slaughter it on Passover, and you go, oh, wait, this won't work for Passover, right? It's a cow. I didn't realize. or it's a lamb that, was older than I thought. And when I meant, oh, darn it, I grabbed the wrong lamb from the pen. This was supposed to be my Thanksgiving offering, and I grabbed it, and you broke Shabbat, right? Because if it's not fit for being a Passover offering, then you definitely didn't offer a Passover offering. And if you definitely didn't offer a Passover offering, then all you just did was kill an animal. And killing an animal on Shabbat is a violation of Shabbat. Okay? Everybody agrees that. 2B.
Now, if the sacrifice are fit to be a Pesach, then Rabbi Eliezer makes him liable to a sin offering, but Rabbi Yoshua exempts him.
Okay. So now we get into our machloket. Now we get into our argument. If you were bringing another animal, right? The animal that I had designated as the lamb from the pen, and I was going to use it for my Thanksgiving offering or something, and I take it up there, and I get in line, and I go, oh, no, I mean this to be my Passover offering, and we slaughter it, and for whatever reason, I'm explaining this to somebody. Well, it's fit to be a Passover offering, right? It fits all the criteria. It's the right animal, the right age, no blemishes, all that good stuff. Did I break Shabbat or not? Right? Because I sacrificed the wrong designated animal, but I did sacrifice the right kind of animal, and I sacrificed with the right intention. Rabbi Eliezer says, you're out. You broke Shabbat because you designated the animal, and that designation is what carries through to the sacrifice. Therefore, it's not a Passover sacrifice, and therefore you killed an animal for no good reason. And Rabbi Yoshua says, no, you sacrificed the right kind of animal with the right intention, even if the animal had a different designation originally, you didn't break Shabbat. We can still call this a Passover sacrifice. And therefore, you didn't break, you didn't have to bring another sacrifice, you're okay.
But still must be a lamb, or could be any animal.
No, it still has to be fit for being a Pesach offering. So it's got to still be the lamb, a 1 year old, and all of that. No blemishes.
Oh, so,
It has to fit all the criteria.
okay.
But you still didn't sacrifice the Pesach. The question is, did you break Shabbat? And they're basically saying you didn't do the right sacrifice, but you also didn't break Shabbat. So you don't, Rabbi Yoshua is saying this, so therefore you don't have to bring a sacrifice. Okay? Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua are going to argue. Because it's more than just I say, he says. He says, she says, doesn't really sound the same. He says, she says. But there were no women rabbis back then. So Rabbi Eliezer says, Rabbi Yoshua says, let's fight.
Rabbi Eliezer said to him, if for the Pesach, which it is permitted to slaughter for its own purpose, yet when he changes its purpose, he is liable, then other sacrifices, which are forbidden to slaughter even for their own purpose, if he changes their purpose, is it not logical that he should be liable?
Okay. So Rabbi Eliezer's position is, look back in Mishnah, the first line of Mishnah 5. And he said, look, if you had a Pesach that you were planning to sacrifice as a Pesach, so it's got the right designation, and yet when you bring it, you mentally have changed it, you're liable. Well, if the right animal, if the right designated animal gets slaughtered for the wrong reason, and you're liable, then certainly the wrong designated animal, you should also be liable for breaking, right? If you can take a Pesach and degrade it, then definitely the wrong animal already starts low and there's no way to go up. That's his position.
But in general, in Judaism, I thought that you can always go up and not down. So yes, you can improve the situation going from something
From something.
it becomes taor, that's
Mhm.
fine, but not vice versa.
Oh, right.
So if you apply this logic, or Rabbi Yeshua is correct, like you can switch from something that is not so clear, so high, you can become much higher.
Okay. One sacrifice is not higher than another sacrifice. So I designated it not for lunch. I designated it for a different sacrifice. And when something has been designated for the temple, it's not an easy thing to change that designation, right? If I say I have a cow and I'm going to sacrifice this cow to the temple for whatever reason, and then the next morning I wake up and say, you know what, I really like the cow. I don't want to sacrifice the cow. I want to keep the cow. It's not that easy. There are some sacrifices where you can do a redemption. You can redeem the cow and you have to pay a penalty for making the designation that you then retract. It's not easy.
eBay.
What's that?
It's not like eBay.
It's not like
That's like
eBay.
eBay.
In fact, it's very much like marriage, which is another example of when you make something holy, right? When you designated something as sanctified, it takes on a special status. And getting rid of that status, in marriage we call it divorce, is not easy.
But that's the situation for Rabbi Eliezer, but for Rabbi Yeshua is the opposite. Something that is not holy.
But it's a different holy.
It's different, but not the holy that is according to the most correct one for the moment. The moment we are talking about the Pesach.
Right.
So if you want to convert something that become to be fixed, the correct match for the moment, for the situation, you become this more holy because you become to make this according to the moment, the need of the moment.
But you're still taking away from its original designation, its sanctification, right? It looks like it's an improvement, but it's still taking away from that original sanctification without properly compensating for it. And so it's not easy to just change its status. And Rabbi Eliezer doesn't say it works. Rabbi Yoshua doesn't say it works. It doesn't work for a Passover sacrifice. He's just saying you didn't break Shabbos. And therefore, you don't have to bring a sin offering.
But it's not still a kosher for Pesach.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
So it's not 100% kosher, but it's not 100% forbidden. And that's where he's sort of falling down, or falling on the line. And Rabbi Eliezer says, yeah, but look, the thing that should have been okay can go down. The thing that should never be okay, the Thanksgiving offering, sin offering, or whatever, can't come up because it should never have made it to the temple on Shabbat. There's no reason for this animal to be there. At least the Pesach had a reason to be there because it was Passover. The other animal had no reason to be at the temple. So how can you possibly say it's okay? It should never have crossed the door. Rabbi Joshua is going to respond.
Rabbi Yoshua said to him, not so. If you say with regard to the Pesach, he is liable because he changed it to something that is forbidden, will you say the same of other sacrifices where he changed them for something that is permitted?
Right? I mean, if you're saying that the reason he's responsible for changing the Pesach to something else is that because it was changing it to something that is forbidden, then are you going to say the opposite? Right? Are you going to say that if you make a sacrifice that you change it for something that's permitted, that's also wrong or also okay? How are you going to handle that case? Right? It's not, you can't just say, oh, if you change it, you change it, or if you don't change it, you do change it. You got to be consistent here. Rabbi Eliezer is going to give a counterexample.
So Rabbi Eliezer said to him, let the community sacrifices prove it.
Pause here for a second. Community sacrifices mean the sacrifices that are offered by the Kohanim on behalf of the entire community. For example, the Tamid offering, the daily offering, and the Musaf offering, which is offered on Shabbat and other holidays, right? It's the bonus offering. So those are community sacrifices. I don't sacrifice it, you don't sacrifice it, you don't sacrifice it. The community sacrifices it through the Kohanim, right? But he's going to use that example as proof. Okay, so just imagine, every time you're reading in Musaf for Shabbat about sacrificing the lambs, that's what we're talking about.
Because community sacrifices are permitted for their own sake, yet he who slaughters other sacrifices in their name is liable. All
right, so let's make sure we understand what he's saying here. He's like, but it's okay for the Kohanim to slaughter the Musaf offering or the Tamid offering on Shabbat. But you, Joe Schmo, regular Jew, if you want to slaughter another animal that had been designated for something and then call it the Musaf offering instead, you don't get to do that. You don't get to say, I'm sacrificing this sheep as the Musaf offering for Shabbat, because you're not the community. And you can't say, well, at least I was offering it for something that is permitted today. Right? Because Musaf offerings are permitted as opposed to all the other types of offerings. Doesn't matter. You're not the one supposed to be offering it. It doesn't work. And therefore, you are still liable for Shabbat. And that means, to go back to our point at hand, somebody who offers another random animal and then tries to say it's a Pesach offering, Rabbi Eliezer says it's just like the Musaf offering. Right? I don't get to change it to something else and then claim it's permitted. If it wasn't permitted or it wasn't properly designated in the beginning, it can't suddenly become one. And now all of a sudden it's okay. Does that make sense? Is his counter argument? Right? You're not allowed to just call an animal the Musaf offering and then the slaughter is okay. If you're not the one supposed to be doing the Musaf offering, you're not the one doing the offering. And even though, yes, technically we can offer Musaf offerings on Shabbat, you can't. You can't change the thing that isn't a Musaf offering, designation, into a Musaf offering, sacrifice, just because you want to. Right? So our Pesach offering, Eliezer is saying, is the same thing. Just because you want to make it into a Pesach offering doesn't mean it becomes one. Therefore, you killed it for no good reason, you broke Shabbat. Rabbi Joshua has a counter-argument.
That's right. He said, Rabbi Joshua said to him, not so. If you say with regard to the public sacrifices, that is because they have a limit, will you say the same of the Pesach, which has no limit?
All right, so his counter-argument is, but the Tamid and the Musaf, you don't get to just slaughter hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. There's exactly precise measures of what is for the Tamid and what is for the Musaf. And Musaf changes depending upon the holidays and all of that. And once those have been sacrificed, you don't get to do more, right? So there's a limit. Passover sacrifice, there's no limit, right? You can slaughter, the community can slaughter hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of lambs. And so me changing my other sacrifice into a Passover sacrifice, I don't have to worry about exceeding the daily limit. Whereas me changing my regular sacrifice into a daily sacrifice, I have to be worried about exceeding that limit. And so the analogy, says Rabbi Joshua, is not good. And we kind of leave it there, which means Rabbi Joshua basically wins. Yay, Joshua.
But then they have Rabbi Meir.
Well, Rabbi Meir also pipes up, and he always makes things confusing.
Okay.
So go ahead and...
Okay, Rabbi Meir says, he too who slaughters other sacrifices in the name of public sacrifice is not liable.
All right, so he had the opinion that actually there's another way out of Rabbi Eliezer's argument from the community sacrifice analogy, which is actually you're not liable if you sacrifice a bonus musaf for yourself rather than only letting the community do it. Now, we don't hold by Rabbi Meir, but...
So before we go there,
yeah.
So then Rabbi Yeshua won that we can if we switch the mind in the last minute and become something for Pesach, it's not kosher, but you're not liable for Shabbat.
Exactly.
He won on that.
Right. That's if we still had a temple, that would be halacha l'maaseh. That would be the actual way we adjudicate for that situation. We don't have a template, so we don't have to worry about the particulars, but notice the style of logic. Again, when we looked at this again in last week's as well, of bringing in examples from other types of sacrifices, other types of cases, and saying, well, can we find an analogy that helps us understand? Or is this a unique case by itself that has, different features that makes the ruling different? And that is the training that goes into formulating a good Jewish mind for analyzing Torah and analyzing Jewish law, is what is the same and what is different, and how does that affect the ruling? That's how Talmud works. That's how Jewish law works, is finding analogies, finding precedent, and finding what is common and what is different. And then deciding, does the difference make a difference, or does the difference not make a difference? Make sense? If you like this, you'll love Talmud. If you like this, you'll love Talmud. Okay. All right, last part of chapter 6. Again, we're still on Shabbat, because this is going to look really, really familiar. This is going to look so familiar because it's very similar to what we did when we talked about whether it was kosher for the Passover offering. But now we're not worried about the kosherness for Passover offering. You can go back and check the Mishnah for that. Now we want to know, did you break Shabbat or not? Okay, so with that as our introduction, let's see.
First, if he slaughtered it for those who are not its eaters, or for those who are not registered for it, for uncircumcised or unclean persons, he is liable.
Okay, so remember, these are the same category of people that if you are slaughtering a sacrifice on their behalf, it's not a kosher Passover sacrifice, right? Because these people can't eat from the Passover sacrifice. Passover sacrifice. If they can't eat from the Passover sacrifice, it's no longer a Passover sacrifice. If it's no longer a Passover sacrifice, you killed the animal for no good reason. You broke Shabbat, right? So therefore, you would have to bring a sin offering, right? So if you say, there was I sacrifice this, and all the people who are going to eat it are unclean, right? They have all been in the Hever Kadisha taking care of the dead. Well, I'm sorry, then it's not a Passover sacrifice, and that means you killed it for no reason, and that means you broke Shabbat. Boom, you've got an extra sacrifice to bring.
Does that actually incidentally mean that animal would then be for the Kohanim to partake of?
No. The animal, an animal that is erroneously brought or that is improperly brought, usually if it gains status at all, is then just turned to ash, or else it's just disposed of.
Oh wow, real waste.
Well, yeah, that's why you're supposed to know what you're doing before you
Right.
actually take the life. I mean, maybe it's important to point that out here, right? The animal the sacrificial system of the animals was not just, grab the knife and slaughter the animals and let's have lunch. It was meant to be a very meticulous and intentional spiritual moment that you knew what you were doing, why you were doing it, what you were doing, and the animal's life was not meant to be wasted, and your action was not meant to be wasted. Right? This is, I guess, a modern analogy, although I don't know if everybody takes it as seriously as they should. A modern analogy would be prayer, right? It's not just a bunch of words that are falling out of your mouth that are just bleh. You're only supposed to be saying them with the right intention, the right words, and the right feeling, and the right way at the right time. And close enough isn't good enough. And you're supposed to mean what you're doing. And definitely when the life of an animal comes into the picture, you're not supposed to just cavalierly kill it and then figure it out afterwards. Okay, part 2.
If he slaughtered it for its eaters, and for those who are not its eaters, for those who are registered for it, and for those who are not registered for it, for circumcised and for uncircumcised, for unclean and clean for clean persons, he is exempt.
All right, again, paralleling what we learned about the sacrifice itself, if it's for a mixed group, that is to mean some people are okay, some people are not okay for eating the animal. Remember, it's not about good or bad, it's just who can eat, who can't eat. If it's a mixed group, then the sacrifice is still a good sacrifice. It's still considered kosher. The people who can't eat still can't eat, but the rest of the people can. And this sacrifice will be good for their Pesach Seder. And since it's good for something, you didn't break Shabbat when you killed it. Right? As long as it's good for something, it's okay. Oh, it's logical, yeah. There is always a logic. Sometimes it's hard to find, but there is always a logic. All right, part 3.
If he slaughtered it and it was found to possess a blemish, he is liable.
All right, again, talking about bringing up the animal cavalierly. You come on, sheep, and you're dragging it up there, and then you notice after you've slaughtered it that it's missing a leg, or whatever blemish there might be. You are supposed to examine the animal before the slaughter, before the sacrifice. And a blemish that is discovered before, that is discoverable before the sacrifice, will retroactively nullify the sacrifice if it's discovered after. Right? If you should have noticed it before you sacrificed, and you didn't, then you're responsible. Right? You should never have brought that animal, therefore you sacrificed it for no good reason, therefore you broke Shabbat, therefore you're liable. Make sense? Makes sense. Part 4.
If he slaughtered it and it was found to be an internal terefa, he is exempt.
All right, so you slaughtered the animal, you opened it up, and
Oops.
it's got cancer,
Right.
right? It was going to die next week anyway. You didn't know. There was no outward signs of this being a problem. You are exempt. You did not break Shabbat. Now, the animal, by the way, still is not good for your Pesach Seder, but you did not break Shabbat because you didn't know. Logical?
Right.
Logical. Yeah, if you didn't know, you didn't know.
If he slaughtered it and it then became known that its owners had withdrawn their hands from it, or that they had died, or that they had become unclean, he is not culpable because he slaughtered it with permission.
Right? So for whatever reason, he is in the process of slaughtering it, and the owners change their intention. Right? They changed their intention because they decided to make a different idea, a different plan. They changed their intention because they're dead. They changed their intention because they're unclean. He doesn't know, but when he went and slaughtered, he didn't know. Therefore, as far as he knew, he was doing the right thing. That's good enough. He didn't break Shabbat. He's not liable. Make sense? Yes, so it's good to finish on a nice logical one.
Yes.
Okay, chapter 7. Let me make sure I save a copy for myself before I send them around. You will notice this is a thicker packet. Chapter 7 has 13 Mishnayot. They're not very long. No massive ones like we did just in chapter 6. No back and forth real head scratchers. But still some very interesting points that need to be clarified. And this is where we get down to cooking. So if you've ever wanted to know how do you actually roast the Passover sacrifice when it comes time to eat it, here we go. Okay.
How is the Pesach roasted? Well, they bring a spit of pomegranate wood and thrust it into its mouth, right down as far as its buttocks, and they place its legs and entrails inside it. That's the words of Rabbi Yosef the Galilean.
Go ahead and read Rabbi Akiva.
Rabbi Akiva says, this is like boiling. Rather, they are hung outside it.
Okay, so what is the issue here? The issue is water, right? We are so told specifically in the Torah, and the citation is there, 12:9 from the book of Exodus, that you are not allowed to boil. You're not allowed to boil the Pesach sacrifice. It has to be roasted.
Right.
So the sages are going to be very, very careful that the only way it cooks is by the fire of the fire.
Direct fire. What
Direct
he's saying
fire.
is the entrails inside the animal are not near the fire, so that they are sort of being boiled by the
juices of the animal.
of the inside.
Right, that the inside juices are going to heat up, and that's what they're actually cooking by. And so that's just like boiling, says Rabbi Akiva. The pomegranate wood comes, and this is something I didn't know before going over this, the pomegranate wood comes because it's considered to be the driest of the woods. And that way, its own wood juice,
Right.
its own
Moisture.
moisture, thank you, moisture, that's much more official
Yeah,
word,
right.
wood juice.
The moisture.
The moisture of the wood will not be considered as part of the cooking process. And that's why they used it. So the whole point here is to minimize any form of cooking other than the direct fire. And that's why Rabbi Akiva says, no, you got to gut the animal and you cut off the legs, but rather than sticking them inside and cooking them inside the animal, you hang them around the outside of the spit and you let them cook over the fire just like the rest of the animal. And yes, you'd be cooking all the insides as well. I know, we're all so used to Just getting that lovely little piece of
Yeah.
styrofoam, cellophane wrap, roast or something. Now you're cooking
So
everything.
what does mean from outside? What does mean?
They hang the legs outside. The first part said stick the legs inside the animal also, but then the legs will cook inside with moisture. They say, no, you don't stick the leg in. You hang the animal on the spit and you hang the legs outside the animal also on the spit or outside the animal so that they will be in contact with the
Let's see
fire.
how I can draw, right? Rabbi Neely tries to draw again.
Oh,
I'm terrible at Pictionary.
otherwise, the legs of the animal would hang down,
Right, so you got animal.
which is okay.
That's a sheep.
That's a sheep.
Okay,
Very nice.
thank you. And Rabbi Yossi is saying you take the legs and you stick them inside along with all the guts and you cook them inside.
The legs inside.
Yeah, you
Inside.
cut off the legs
Yes,
and then you stick them
them in.
inside.
Okay.
Yeah, well, no, you've cut open the stomach.
Okay.
Because you cut open the stomach, you pull out the guts, you get rid of all of the nasty bits, and then you stuff them back inside. And cooking things inside things, you people never have stuffing in your turkey,
No.
right? I mean that's not that weird. Or if you've ever had turducken,
Oh.
right, which is a turkey stuffed with a duck stuffed with the chicken. It's like layers of meat. I had a rabbi friend make it for me once. It was a very unusual taste. It was good.
This actually says the entrails are in there along with the legs.
Exactly.
They don't take the other stuff out either. Everything is inside.
Exactly. And what the Rabbi Akiva is saying is no, you go ahead and, we're going to have 4 legs and maybe you have all of your other stuff and
And then you've got the wood of the spit going right through.
like that. And
They're all hanging.
you cook it like that. So
that's
that's
better. That's the way that we do barbecue.
You got it.
spoken like a South American.
Now we are talking.
Now it's good. Right. But the issue they're trying to highlight here is not just the culinary skill. The issue they're highlighting here is how is it cooking in order to fulfill the mitzvah of roasting rather than boiling. Because the boiling, the use of water to cook it is specifically forbidden by the Torah. Right? This isn't just if it says roast, we shouldn't do water. It says don't cook it in water. So they really are making sure they don't cook it in water. Okay. Mishnah 2.
One may not roast the Pesach either on a metal spit or on a grill. So Rabbi Zadok said, it once happened that Rabbi Gamliel said to his servant Tabi, go out and roast us the Pesach on the grill.
All right. So what's the issue with
By the way, so who was there? The opinion?
Akiva?
Akiva.
Yeah. Akiva almost always wins. And that's part of the reason why you also study the Talmud is they go into more detail of when they win, and sometimes it wins, but they change it enough that it looks actually like the other person. But yeah, so what's the issue with if this is made of metal, of the spit is made of metal? Well, what happens to metal in heat? It gets hot, right? Metal will
Really,
heat
really
up
hot.
really, really hot. And now this, let me see if I can do a different color. Now this part of the meat around the metal spit, what's cooking it?
It's cooking from the heat of the metal, not from the fire of the roasting.
Exactly. It's cooking from the inside out because the metal is taking the heat in and then cooking from around the metal. And they say, no, that's why you can't use metal. You got it. Because you think, if I don't want to cook with a piece of anything that has moisture in it, let me use metal to cook it on. No, you got to use wood because if you use metal, the heat's going right down it. And now we're cooking from the inside. And now it's not cooking from the fire. Same thing. Throw this, on a grill. Is it being cooked by the fire? Or is it being cooked by the heat of the grill, by the metal that's actually hot from the fire? And the answer that they're saying here is it's being cooked by the metal, therefore you shouldn't. Now, Rabban Gamliel is saying actually a grill is fine, but Rabban Gamliel is Rabban Gamliel. It's kind of a special case. This is actually the later Rabban Gamliel by most authorities, who would have been, quite interestingly, cooking this after the temple had long been destroyed, which meant they were still cooking a meal that mimicked the Pesach offering in even this detail.
But it's not forbidden. Like to make a sacrifice because you can only.
It's not a sacrifice.
In the temple, but if you cook in a way that is like the way that we cook it, then It's like you try to create and replica of the temple.
That eventually becomes the dominant view, right? Eventually that becomes exactly how we now treat this, and why if somebody was cooking a lamb for Pesach like this and they were using a pomegranate wood spit and all of that, people were going, whoa, 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 whoa. What do you think you're in, the temple? Right? This is not the Beit HaMikdash. We don't do that anymore.
So at the time the Rabbi Gamliel still was fine.
Not fine, but possible. Right? There were already people who were saying, I don't think we should be doing this, right? But it was still possible, and he wasn't excommunicated for having done so. And that's why there's still a little bit of an argument, but the dominant opinion is, no, we don't do that. Okay, but the grill issue is the more important one for this particular Mishnah. That's almost like a little sidetrack into Rabban Gamliel's life. Okay, part 2.
If the Pesach touched the clay of the oven, he should cut away that place.
All right, so you have an oven that you might be cooking this in, right? And let's imagine it's one of those giant clay ovens, and it bumps into the clay. Well, what cooked it? The hot clay or the fire? We don't know. So what do? You slice off that upper layer that came into contact. By the way, and no, I don't recommend this because it's more complicated than it sounds. This is the standard procedure we do for many types of cross-contamination in a kosher kitchen between meat and milk. All right, if a drop of milk falls on a piece of meat in certain ways, in certain quantities, you cut off that part of the meat. Or in some other cases, you just rinse the meat, right? And in this particular case, because we know that it got cooked, we have to cut off the top layer, and that's what's happening. It's a little more complicated than that, so please don't run home and start splashing milk on your meat and then saying all I have to do is wash it or cut it off. But that is a standard procedure for when you have a cross-contamination kitchen situation in Judaism. Is the first level is to wash off. Washing off doesn't work with cooking, and the second level is to simply pare off the upper layer that actually came into contact with whatever it wasn't supposed to. Now we get into a little bit deeper cutting.
If some of its juice dripped onto the clay of the oven and then dripped back onto the Pesach, he must cut away that place.
Right. Now, when it means cut away, we're talking like cutting down deep into the meat, like an inch or so. Not just cutting off that surface, not just peeling the surface, which is what we were talking about from the clay, but because the drip goes into the meat, not just searing the outside, we actually have to remove a chunk.
Sorry, what is the case? I don't understand.
The case is when you have juice, and I don't know the physics of this, but imagine the juice gets onto the clay, and then the juice comes back onto the animal.
What do you mean juice?
The juice, the drippings.
The dripping of
the animal drippings. The not juice like orange juice, but the meat juice.
Which comes from the melting fat of the animal.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly.
You have a juicy steak. The juice is the fat that's melted.
Right, it's what makes it sizzle on the barbecue.
So if some of this drips on the clay and then comes back onto the Pesach sacrifice,
It's more serious than just coming into contact because the juice can permeate, and that's why you have to cut off. Now, notice, they're not going to tell you, throw away the animal.
Right.
This is your Pesach sacrifice.
But they didn't say how much you need to cut in this case.
The Talmud goes into more detail in that, and the general rule is you take the area, you cut out about an inch down of that area. So you've definitely lost some, but you're not throwing away the entire animal.
and the juice came from the animal in the first place, so it's already there,
Mm-hmm.
the liquids. But if it comes out and goes back on, that's not good.
Right.
Wow.
Right, because it's now been transferring through the clay, and the whole thing has to come from this other form of cooking.
That's right.
Right, it's all about doing it the way the Torah says to cook it. And then part 4 is almost an aside again for a different category of cooking altogether.
If some of its juice fell on the flour, he must take a handful away from its place.
Right, so the juice sprinkles into the flour that's down there that you're also cooking, because remember you got like one big oven for cooking everything. You can't eat that juice because that juice, may have been not cooked in the right way. And the flour itself was also cooking in its own way. So you have to remove it, and you just reach in, you scoop out the flour that came into contact, and you go on with the rest of the flour, no problem.
And the common people know all these laws.
They're supposed to.
No, because
Yes.
I remember that, if I remember correctly, one of the problems that they have, the rabbis, are with the Amcha. And most of these sacrifices they were made by the Amcha, they don't have the literacy for all these details.
Well, the details aren't that complicated, really, right? I mean, everybody knows the 5-second rule when it comes to food in modern world, right? If you drop a cookie on the ground, you got 5 seconds. By the way, did you know that if you drop broccoli on the ground, it becomes instantly inedible? Just ask any kid. I can't eat that, Mom. I dropped it on the ground. The cookie, 5 seconds at least, maybe 5 minutes, but the broccoli instantly becomes forbidden as soon as it touches the ground. Little known fact about broccoli. So the details here are not that specific. What is specific when we're coming to Amcha, to the Am Haaretz, the illiterate people, not illiterate like they can't read, but illiterate that they don't want to learn, is the spirit, right? Somebody who doesn't want to learn, somebody who doesn't really care, they're going to just eat this however they feel like, no matter what. It's not that they were ignorant, it was they were indifferent. Whereas somebody who cares about this will learn. You know, like kashrut is not 100% simple and easy, but somebody who wants to keep kosher can learn how to keep kosher. And it doesn't matter whether you don't have to be a rocket scientist, you don't have to be a rabbi, you don't have to be, the brain surgeon kind of person. Anybody can learn to keep kosher and can learn the basic rules of kashrut. Yeah, when it comes to slaughtering an animal and checking the insides to see what's kosher and not kosher on the lungs and the liver, that's harder. And then you need special training. But the basic rules of this and the basic rules of kashrut, not that hard if you want to learn. And the Amcha, the Am Haaretz problem was that they were indifferent, not that they were stupid.
I thought they were ignorant.
Well, ignorant is a state of decision. It's not a disability. Right? It's not that you can't learn, it's you've chosen not to. The rabbis talk about people that are in Amcha that are successful and wealthy business people. They're not stupid. They just don't want to learn how to keep Judaism. So yeah, it's a good question. And yeah, it's not a big problem. Okay, are we on for Mishnah 3 then? Okay. I know, I'm getting hungry. I haven't had dinner yet. I should have realized I have to eat before I teach this.
Oh, yeah, no,
And I don't think I'm having fleishik tonight either, unfortunately. Certainly not having lamb.
No, certainly.
Lamb. Okay, Mishnah 3.
Okay. If he basted the Pesach with the oil of teruma.
Right, remember what truma is? Truma are the gifts that are given by the rest of us to the Kohanim. And they were usually edible forms, because that's what gifts were in the past, and what the Kohanim were living off of. But there is an issue, of course, because if it is something that is truma, then it can only be eaten by somebody that is ritually pure and from the Kohen's household, right? I can't become a guest at the Kohen's truma party, and so the question is, I've got a Pesach offering, and I'm making sure that it's cooking right using oil, but the oil was truma oil, not just something he bought at the supermarket. Who can eat it? Keep reading.
If they basted it with the oil of truma, if they who registered for it are a company of priests, they may eat it.
Okay, so if it's a bunch of Kohanim and they're able to eat truma, no problem. But if it's the rest of
If it's
us,
the rest of us, they are Israelites. If it is still raw, they may wash it off.
right? They go, oh man, you just poured that oil on that's in the truma bottle, right? Or whatever's happening in your house.
Right.
Then okay, it's okay. We haven't cooked it yet. You wash it off. You're okay.
So if it's mixed the group, they cannot eat it.
They can't, because I can't eat truma. I'm not a Kohen.
So it's very similar, parallel to the Pesach.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a mixed group, they can be there, but they cannot eat. So in this case, they can be in the house, but they cannot eat. So
But there's a way to fix it.
Huh?
There's a way to fix it. If it hasn't been cooked yet, you can wash it off.
Right.
And if it has been cooked,
If it has been roasted, peel off the outer part.
pare off.
Yeah, with paring and peeling.
Yeah, exactly.
Rather than cutting chunks.
Right, you're not cutting chunks. You're just scraping, slicing the layer all the way around the outer side, the part that was actually in contact with the oil, and you're okay.
Eat it, not to waste.
And then, well, it's not just a question of not wasting, although we do have a mitzvah not to waste. This is the mitzvah to eat the Pesach sacrifice. So if I'm grouping with you and you're a Kohen and I'm not, and you bring the oil to the cooking, and you say, oh, by the way, I got that yesterday as truma. And we go, what? But we're not a Kohen. How? What? Then we have to have a way to fix it, or else I can't do the mitzvah of eating the Pesach. And now I'm out of a mitzvah. Right? So it's not just don't waste it. It's not just, you can't eat because, oh dear, you're not a priest. It's how do we make this work? Because we've got a mitzvah here that we all need to do, to eat from this animal. And we got to find a way to make it work. And the rabbis found a way to make it work. Wash it off or cut it off. However,
if he anointed it with oil of second tithe, he must not charge its value for the members of the company, because second tithe must not be redeemed in Jerusalem.
All right. So this was a head scratcher.
Oh, boy.
So second tithe is one of the additional layers of tithing, right? And second tithe you can redeem. It has to be eaten in Jerusalem, right? Produce of the second tithe has to be eaten in Jerusalem. But if you live too far from Jerusalem to schlep it all there, you can turn it into money. You can go to Jerusalem and you can buy food with the money and then eat that in Jerusalem, right? That's the normal version of how this works. However, if it is oil that's from the second tithe and you've used it, it's okay to eat, because remember, everybody's eating in Jerusalem. That's where the Pesach offering has to be eaten. But he can't charge everyone else for the oil that he used to cook it.
He can't.
He can't, because if he charges you, that's like redeeming the oil, right? He's getting money for the oil, and you're not allowed to do that in Jerusalem, because you're only supposed to redeem it if you're too far from Jerusalem to actually eat it in Jerusalem. So if he uses the oil, he can't put it on the bill when they're settling up the debt of who has to pay what for the meal. He can't say, oh, you got to pay me back for the oil, because that's like redeeming it. And you're not allowed to redeem it in Jerusalem. You're supposed to eat it in Jerusalem. And you did eat it. Quit trying to get your money back. Guys have flashbacks to like when you're having lunch with people and you're trying to split the bill and wait a minute, who got the hors d'oeuvres? I didn't eat any hors d'oeuvres. That's kind of what's going on here, except we've added a whole nother layer of complication because you've got mitzvahs that are banging against each other. Make sense? Maybe? Yes? No? And you thought your Seder was complicated?
Yeah.
Yeah. Seders are easier now in many, many ways.
Let's finish 4. Come on.
I know, but okay, we're going to finish 4, but I got to warn you. The last part of Mishnah 4 isn't really going to be explained until we get later into chapter 7. It's still in chapter 7, but it's going to introduce an idea that is going to sound really, really weird, and I'm going to have to hold for the explanation. Okay, so let's go ahead and read it, though, because most of chapter 4 is short and simple, and then we'll work on the rest later.
5 sacrifices may come in uncleanness, but may not be eaten in uncleanness.
Right, so these are sacrifices that you can do it even if you are ritually unclean. Right? Normally, you don't go and do a sacrifice if you're ritually unclean. And they're saying these ones, you can do them when they're unclean, but you can't actually eat it if you're unclean. Does that make sense, the distinction?
Yeah.
You can make the offering, but you can't eat the offering. And that's unusual because most of the times you can't make the offering or eat the offering if you are unclean. Okay, here they are.
The omer, the 2 loaves, the showbread, the sacrifices of the public peace offerings, and the goats of new months.
Right, all of those, even if you're unclean, you can sacrifice them, but you don't get to eat them.
The Pesach, which comes in uncleanness, is also eaten in uncleanness, for from the very beginning it came for no other purpose but to be eaten.
All right, so there is a special category, and this is the part that's going to sound weird. There is a special set of circumstances where you can offer a Passover sacrifice even while ritually unclean, and you can eat the Passover sacrifice even while ritually unclean.
But we didn't see that if you don't supposed to, you need to wait for the second.
Exactly right, right? So this is where you go, wait a minute. I thought, and you're absolutely right, the Torah says very clearly, if you're ritually unclean and it's the day of Passover, you wait a month, you do it in Iyar, the next month after Nisan, and you do your Passover sacrifice there. So how in the world are we doing a Passover sacrifice when I'm ritually unclean, And then, okay, fine, I understand I get to eat it because the only reason I offered it is to eat it, right? Unlike the other ones where we're offering them just for a pure mitzvah of offering them. These ones, the whole point of the Passover sacrifice is to eat the Passover sacrifice. And if I don't eat it, it's not really a sacrifice. How do I eat a sacrifice when I'm unclean? And that you're going to have to wait for. But let me just say it's a rather rare set of circumstances where it works out, and you won't be alone in this process. I'll leave that as a teaser. You can flip ahead if you like, but we'll definitely get to it next week. We'll definitely get it to next session. Reminder again, next week I've got a teacher staff meeting that I'll be with, so we'll be meeting in 2 weeks. Okay. Cliffhanger. How often do you get a cliffhanger Mishnah? Once again, I'll remind everyone, the whole thing about Mishnah is the Mishnah thinks you know everything else except the page it's talking about. So it thinks you already know what it's talking about when it says a Passover sacrifice that's offered in uncleanness and eaten in uncleanness.